Well, this is the first guest that we ever had on Food Bites. This is Chad Callander, Executive Director of Meals on Wheels London. Chad, it was a year ago, when we had our talk, and it just feels like so much has changed since then. Like it feels to me that back then, a year ago, we were thinking, okay, well, COVID is in receding, and now maybe we can kind of get back to what it is that we need to be doing. But at least for us anyway, it didn't work out like that. I don't think for communities it did either. It's just the cost of living increases have just been so great that it's kind of changed the equation for all of us. I'm sure that that's true for Meals on Wheels as well, and I'd like to talk about that. But why don't you talk just a bit about what the activities of Meals on Wheels are, just so that people know who don't?
Sure, absolutely. So I think most people, when they think of Meals on Wheels, they think of the traditional, we deliver a meal to someone once a day. And that's true. That is one of our programmings, but it's only one program actually. So we like to say that we provide meals for every meal of the day. So essentially we have programs, whether they're frozen or daily meals, that, provide for a meal for lunchtime, but also they can order in advance and have meals for dinner time. We also offer a breakfast bag with our daily meal program, so people have breakfast for the following day. And then our frozens, you can kind of order in a bunch and have the meals kind of as you need them. So that's kind of the meals part of our service. And then, of course, we have our transportation program, which is we drive people to wellness-related appointments at a flat and subsidized rates. And sorry, I should say that for all of our programs, actually, we do offer subsidized rates for people based on their income. It's a big part of what Meals on Wheels does, and it's become even more vital, as you said, about the increased costs for seeing more individuals coming on service and more individuals accessing subsidy.
Yeah. So talk about that subsidized cost piece a bit. I know when we talked yesterday, we talked about that's an important component and challenge for you as well. How's that changed in the last year?
The number of individuals requiring subsidy has gone up. So typically about half of our clients usually use subsidized rates in order to afford their meals or programs. Now that's at almost 60% and still growing. And that's because of increased costs. It's one of the largest increase we've seen in a year in a very long time. Typically, we see that number grow a little bit, but I think it speaks to the increase in costs, but also the crisis that many in our community are facing with, their dollar not going as far as it used to.
Yeah. Chad, when you have something like that challenges you as an organization, as it has for us as well as a food bank, how then do you go after those funds to, mitigate that increase or be able to meet that challenge? Is it something that you would go into, say, to somebody like the city or whatever it is and say, look, at our increases are going up, we need assistance? Do you do more of a public, exposure to the more people know about those challenges, or do you do all of the above?
Definitely all of the above. I think most nonprofit organizations, we use every single tool that's in our belt. Yeah. I can see for sure that one of the things that we've done with our organization, as well as other Meals on Wheels across the province, is we've reached out to Ontario Health, who does fund some of our programs, and just said, hey, this is the crisis we're facing. We need additional funding. But also, just advocating for grants. When we did our recent fundraising initiative, we kind of painted it that, helping us raise this amount of money will actually provide this many meals in your community, and this is why it's important. But really, it's just it's getting in front of as many people who will listen, and just telling them why this is so urgent, why we need it, and why maybe this population particularly can't necessarily advocate for itself, because many of those individuals are just trying to get by, or socially isolated, and are facing a number of other pressures where we kind of want to be able to do that work for them.
Yeah. It seems to me when you look at seniors, you're looking at a group that's kind of cemented in place. That's my feeling. While all sorts of other sectors of society are moving around and trying to find their place in this new future, for seniors, the choices are far more limited. We tend to think of in the past of seniors with pensions and all of that kind of stuff, and it's true that they have pensions, but many of them are fixed. Many of them have lost a partner, and they're trying to live in a unit now that's too expensive, and so it's really difficult. And I know that we as food banks we were up speaking at Queen's Park a couple of months ago, and we were speaking with MPPs as well as ministers, and we had two seniors from Mississauga who spoke, and they were on ODSP as seniors, and they talked about how they had not had an increase in a decade. And as a result, though, the price of food had gone way up. The properties that they were living in, that cost for rent had gone way up. And they couldn't do it anymore. So what they did is they became homeless. They just didn't have a choice, right? They couldn't afford where they were living. Many of their family members had lost touch with them or had passed on, so it was difficult. So many of them were homeless and were making up part of the homeless agencies that were in Toronto, which in turn was providing new challenges to homeless agencies who prior to that were looking more towards more single males or whatever it was that had been part of the homeless thing before. Is that your sense? Is it your sense that for seniors, just overall, things seem kind of fixed? It's very hard for them to get out of the constrained positions they're in. Is that what you're experiencing as an organization?
Absolutely. We engage with our clients on a regular basis, and it's not necessarily maybe data that we collect, but we're seeing more commenting on how it's harder to stay in the place that they're currently living because of increased costs, or we're seeing more reaching out for crisis compassionate meals, the number of people who are needing more assistance from us. Like we accept as part of Meals on Wheels that some of the work that we do is writing off certain accounts because the individual can't pay, and so helping them stay on service, and that's becoming part of it. But I was actually not surprised to learn recently that one of the most growing demographics in the homeless population are individuals who are over 50. And that's because their income has stayed fixed for so long. There has been, as you said, no addition to their income whatsoever. And as you mentioned, when a partner passes away, sometimes that income is cut in half, and it just makes their situation untenable. So I'm worried, to be quite honest with you, that we're going to be heading towards more of a crisis as the ripple effect of these cost increases starts to grow. I mean, as you mentioned, COVID has, in a sense, somewhat wrapped up. It's still a threat to our community, but I think there's a growing concern with the effects from COVID, such as cost increase, continuing to hurt vulnerable populations even further.
Yeah, it was so interesting after the session was over with the combined group of MPPs and ministers. We sat down with some of them and had a discussion with them because we've been around a long time and they knew I used to be in politics and they wanted to talk about it a bit. But one of the things one of the ministers said that I really found interesting is that when we look at government programs and trying to help people who are at risk or people who are marginalized or whatever it is, more and more as we think about homelessness, we're thinking of homeless youth, those kind of things. The idea of seniors actually being vulnerable to a lot of the things that have affected other age groups within society, and not so much seniors in the past, this has been kind of new to them. So the seniors generation is actually kind of the forgotten or ignored generation. A lot of the legislation that would normally be coming through for other groups, they're only just starting to get in their heads now, I think, the real serious implications of seniors who have now run out of options. And they're having to design legislation and other things to do that. But I presume that legislation is probably still a few years out. I mean, I could see it, I can understand it, because usually in the past, in governments or bureaucracies or whatever, funders, they would think that seniors are basically okay. There's programs for them, or they did okay because of their pensions. Let's focus on these other vulnerable sectors within society. And now seniors have fallen into that. And I presume, in many ways, at the food bank, for instance, our senior numbers have gone up a little over 10% in the past year. So we are seeing that, but we wouldn't see it nearly to the degree that you would. Does that alarm you? Can I ask you this question? You don't have to answer it if it's not easy for you, but I'm alarmed that I don't think the future work towards seniors in legislation, in social policy, in economics, it seems to me that's going to have to play catch up to all of this other stuff. Are you getting that sense? And also, as you're out there speaking with seniors, do you think they're getting that sense that things seem increasingly hopeless?
I definitely do. And I think you used the exact word that I would, and that it's catch up, that we're starting to realize that this is a large problem and we are playing catch up. And, if I take, for example, so in London, we have a community support services sector, which is basically a lot of services that seniors access. It's actually a network of collection of services. There is a real struggle for individuals to even afford the basic home care that they need. So whether that's PSW, whether that's, our meals, whether it's, transportation, they're struggling. And we're seeing it across each agency. We're discussing about how they can't afford this, and the amount of, writing off of accounts or, bills going unpaid is increasing and increasing. And I think you're right. The legislation is a few years behind, because I think for many years, as you mentioned, you had pensions and you had the support that you need, but I think it's all starting to catch up, and I do see a bit of a looming crisis. However, I will say that it seems like the government has really started to step up in terms of, the Ontario government, in providing more funding for community support services, because that really is a cost savings in terms of preventing people from things like homelessness, from things like going into hospital. It's a really large concern, and I definitely echo, that a crisis, I think, is coming unless we start to catch up faster.
Yeah. And then there's the spin-off effect, right? I think one of the things that I've been heartened by seeing in the last year is more and more people are equating homelessness with health. They're putting those two things together. So, for instance, when the city had their big summit, you were probably there, but they called it the health summit, not the homeless summit. Right. And it's this idea that as people don't have security, either financial or have a home or whatever it is, over time, their health begins to deteriorate and break down. And we definitely know that from school breakfast programs. So the food bank is involved in a lot of those. But it's actually in some ways easier to get support for those things, A, because they're kids. Right? But B, because there is this sense of understanding that if kids don't get proper nutrition when they are young and they are in school, they won't learn as well, right? They will have other physical conditions maybe as they get older or whatever. So it's easy to look at something like that, easier, and say, okay, we better target that group because there's health implications, not just educational implications. I think when we look at homelessness in general, like London has been trying to do in the last few years, we realize that there's a strong health component to that as well, which is why it was called the Health Summit. But when it comes to seniors, both young and the elderly are more vulnerable in that health context than those that are in the in-between years, because their bodies are either not fully formed yet in the case of youth, and so therefore not proper nutrition or security or emotional things that they go through, or seniors who are spending a lot of their time seeing specialists or are facing type 2 diabetes. There's a run of those things that happen to all of us as we get older. It seems to me that to look at it in a health lens, through a health lens for seniors, is becoming more important than ever, because really for seniors, the struggles with advancing years is that the body is in this kind of breaking down stage, right? And therefore, if we're not going to care for them nutritionally, let's say they put off meals for a number of different reasons, then that breakdown will accelerate. I'm sure you know that far better than I do, but have you found over the course of the last year, Chad, that seniors are tending to skip meals more because they don't have the resources that are necessary to provide 3 meals a day? Are you finding that? Are they talking about that?
Yeah, we're starting to see a lot more comments, and particularly when we're talking to people about the financial aspect of our programs, because it is a fee for service, but obviously, we do our best to work with each individual. But, there's been more comments about, well, I can't afford my medication, or do I choose food, or they'll be ordering less, and we may comment to them, is there a reason that you're ordering less? You usually get more, and a lot of times, it's just, I can't afford as much as I used to be able to afford, and even our organization has not been immune to the price increases. Some of our food costs have gone up by over 10%, even in the past year alone. And we're trying to weather that as much as we could. But it's definitely something we're starting to see. And, the comments are concerning. And I think, too, partially what's concerning it, and it may be unrelated, but I think a lot of times we just assume that because someone's a senior, there's someone in their life that's caring for them. And a lot of our clients, that's just simply not the case. They don't have anybody. They, their kids may live far away, or they didn't have kids, or, there's a number of different reasons. But we're starting to definitely see more of that and comments concerning that. I mean, I also look at, we partner with the London Food Bank to provide food boxes to people who can't physically get to the food bank. Yeah. Well, since 2019, the number that we're delivering to homes has doubled. So we used to do about 400 food boxes a year, and now we're doing almost 800. So alarming.
Yeah. I guess there's the other side too. I don't think people talk about this much, but I spoke with a couple on Saturday that asked for some help, and the caregivers. There tends to be more caregivers among seniors than anywhere, because usually their spouse or a sister or something is really in difficulty. So caregivers end up. They have a bit more time. They're able to do that stuff. The problem is that the caregivers themselves are doing without in order to be able to help the person. So this woman, for instance, her husband was quite sick. He's almost legally blind. He's struggling. He's getting around. But when it comes to food, the husband stopped her in the middle of the conversation and said, "I know she's pretending to eat, but she's not eating, to make sure that I have enough food. But I can't see it." He said, but I know that that's what she's doing. That's happening around things like drug costs, other things as well. I think that caregivers within the seniors setting are themselves really facing steep challenges, because their natural inclination is to sacrifice for the person that they're working on. And we would naturally assume there would be enough for both. But in the case in which there's not, you would think that it's the person that's really the most sick or has the most medication that would be in trouble, but often it's the caregiver that is, because they're targeting those resources to that person. Do you see that, or am I out in left field there?
No, I don't think you're out in left field. And I mean, a lot of the times I'd say it's more the clients like we're seeing are the ones that are on their own, not necessarily maybe as much of the example, but, one, I guess, it's a sad trend, but it's a bit of a heartwarming trend, is we're actually seeing more individuals who are struggling have individuals step up around them. Yeah. For example, we're seeing a lot of our clients who their emergency contact is a neighbor or a friend or, somebody that lives across the hall or, we're starting to see kind of the community of forming around the individuals that we serve, but also even some, seniors who are teaming up. Maybe they're both single and they're deciding to live together to make things a little bit cheaper. I think that's a trend that's growing as well. But in the cases where we do see it's two individuals and the one kind of is caring for the other, yes, you can definitely tell that there often is a sense of sacrifice just in the comment that they make for the services that they're ordering.
Yeah. Chad, one of the things I really enjoyed learning about Meals on Wheels on this subject about a caregiver or somebody keeping an eye on somebody else is that's really one of the key functions of Meals on Wheels. Like, you don't just go to a door, knock on the door, and then if nobody is home, you take the meal back or you leave it on the doorway. What happens at that particular point when there isn't a response?
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. We always say we're more than a meal, and that's because we provide a little bit of social interaction, but it's also, a wellness check-in. Yeah. So basically, if we were to come to your door to do a delivery, we would follow a procedure if you didn't answer. The first part of that procedure is just calling your phone just to see if maybe you didn't hear the door. Sometimes it's, we go as far as into contacting emergency contacts. Maybe you were out of town or maybe something happened and you had an appointment and you forgot to tell us. No big deal. And then we go as far to if it comes to the end of the day and we haven't heard from you or your emergency contact, we do call the London Police to do a wellness check. And we do about 500 of those a year. most of the time it's usually just something simple, that they forgot their meal was coming, or they were chatting with a friend down the hall. But there are those instances where somebody's, fallen in the shower, or, just fallen in the home, or sometimes, unfortunately, worse things. And that's why the wellness check is so important, to make sure that somebody is okay, but also to provide dignity to those who may not be.
I presume if that was true of my mom and dad, and I was living in, say, Calgary, which is where I was born, I would worry about that. And so the fact that Meals on Wheels actually just doesn't knock on the door and that's it, that's, for me, would bring some peace of mind as well, to know that that meal coming also has that kind of checkup that goes along with it. I would have to think that that's comforting for people who, if they lived in London, might just be able to drive over there and see for themselves if there wasn't no answer. But you're able to kind of reach out in that kind of way. I would have to think that's comforting for family members and other people of support.
Yeah, I think it's one of the key parts of our service. And I mean, realistically, as much as, children or caregivers, they always want to be in the same city as the person they're looking after. That's just some cases not a reality. And that's why services like ours are so important, so that we can provide that kind of, peace of mind. And, I have to say that I'm continuously amazed when I speak to our volunteers, just the relationship they start to build with individuals on their regular routes. And, they're some of our best, they provide some of our best information, because we can follow up if they say, I went to visit Betty and she just didn't seem like herself. And then we can follow up with the caregiver to see if there's something going on, or, just alert to something that may be happening in the future. It's really heartwarming to see that. And, I just the glow, I guess, on our volunteers' faces when they speak about the people that they're interacting with. I think it's as very much as it is for the person they're serving as it is for them.
You're not just selling that as a concept as an executive director. I've been there. I was out a month and a half ago, for instance, with someone, and a Meals on Wheels driver, and I see that exact thing that you're talking about. It's not the first time that I've seen it. It's probably not the 10th time I've seen it. I've seen it a number of times, but it's almost like a friend coming to the door. There was some at the door waiting, right, when the driver pulled up, and it wasn't so much to take the food. They were asking the driver, did you see the Leafs game last night? So then they cry in there, whatever it is that they're doing. But I do see that friendship piece is really, really important, because a lot of these people who you're reaching are also lonely. I would have to think that that's really important.
It is. And I mean, you said it exactly right. Like, I've done the deliveries myself, and the number of times that the individual was waiting for me to come, it's because sometimes I'm the only person, or the volunteer is the only person that they may see in a day. So they look forward to that interaction. So it's so much a part of what we do, but it's just, it's a simple, easy connection that really just makes a lot of difference to our those we serve.
I think it's amazing. It's probably my favorite part of the Meals on Wheels operation. I just think I can see why it's so necessary. Can we talk about volunteers for a sec? We as a food bank have taken on a lot more agencies during the course of COVID that we're trying to help, but a number of them are struggling on the volunteer side. I think the feeling was that once COVID kind of receded, volunteers might be able to come back now because there weren't these restrictions or limitations. Some of them are having trouble that way, seeing that grouping of volunteers coming back. How is that going at Meals on Wheels?
I do have to say, just because I know this will be kind of going out into the public, that I do want to thank our volunteers, the ones who have stuck with us, particularly during COVID. We have a very good volunteer retention rate, and I think that's for a couple of reasons. But one of the big ones is, as we talked about, you get to see, it's an opportunity where you get to see the impact of what you're doing. And I think that's very strong in volunteering. Yeah. But we're definitely in need of volunteers. Our volunteer population, typically we're a lot of retirees, and people are getting older and, maybe just, winding down themselves. So we're definitely looking for more, volunteers across our spectrum. It was interesting during COVID, we had more volunteers than we needed, but I think people who are volunteers themselves are also facing struggles. Their costs are going up. Volunteer may be one of their last priorities, because they do have to take care of themselves. So we're definitely in need of volunteers for our meal delivery, as well as our transportation programs, our transportation program in particular. because I think a lot of people shied away from the transportation because they were scared of being that close to individuals, and we're having trouble kind of building up that database. So even if you can offer 1 day a week to a transportation program, or even an afternoon to do a transportation ride, please connect with us. Fill out a form on our website, and we'll work with you to figure out what opportunity would be best.
So through the website, they would contact you. So let's say I wanted to help, but I'm a little bit nervous about doing it by myself. Is there the ability for me to be able to go with another driver to kind of learn the ropes before I go off on my own?
Absolutely. We work with every person based on your comfort level. So, if you just want to get out there and do it, we'll orientate you, take you through the whole process. We don't just, take your application, meet with you for a minute, and then send you out. We definitely go through a whole process of letting you know, like, what do you do if somebody's not home? How does it work for insurance and things? How does the reimbursement work? We go through a whole process to make sure that you have all the information you need in order to go out there and deliver services and feel comfortable doing so.
Yeah. What's your feeling, Chad? Just overall, my sense is one of the people that volunteer at the food bank is that these challenges are so immense at the moment that they're actually overwhelming food banks across the country. There are food banks that are closing. There are food banks that are rationing. There's food banks using more of a means test in order to kind of limit things. Now, we've been fortunate in London. We haven't had to do all those things. But I think food banks are still kind of in a state of shock at how quickly that has all changed. And part of the thing that has changed is not just the people that are coming to them, but also donors and volunteers, because they're paying increased costs for food as well. They're paying increased costs for rent, for inflationary costs, for all of those things. I guess for myself, I kind of worry that, not that people will face compassion fatigue, but as they hear more and more about seniors, for instance, really struggling and trying to get by in this time, and they really, really want to help, it's kind of difficult for them to do that because they're trying to manage their own lives and their own cost of living. I do kind of worry that if to a certain degree, support programs don't step up and help with some of these things, and it's left more and more to citizens or donors or volunteers, that we're really putting a lot on them. It's a huge load to put this care on. On the other hand, it's probably the most inspiring thing that I see, right? There are just so many people that are doing it. I think I maybe asked you in our first interview, but do you feel despair sometimes?
You know what? Sometimes. I think you can't do the type of work that we do and hear some of the stories we hear and not feel a little despair. However, what I will say and what try to kind of motivates me and our organization is that, for every story of despair, I hear one of heart and hope. And I have to really encourage people. I know everyone's struggling, but even if you can get creative in the way you help, and, I talked about, checking on a neighbor or something like that, even small, simple things that we each as individuals can do to contribute to community, I think will make a difference. I think we also too, maybe all just assume that after COVID kind of, I don't want to say went away, but, as we started to recover, the things would just go back to normal. And I think we have to realize that, yes, COVID was a big challenge, but that doesn't mean there are more challenges coming. And I think like all individuals, I do have moments of despair where I wonder, oh my God, oh my goodness, how is this going to get worse? But I really try to remember those stories of heartwarming that people are doing for individuals to help them. And I think that's a big thing for me, but yeah.
Well, if you can let your board know and your volunteers and your staff that I think we just had a strategic planning session for the food bank all day last week, looking through stuff. And Meals on Wheels has given us the capacity as a food bank to develop a thrust out into that community that is so vulnerable. We don't do it on our own. We don't deliver or anything like that. But our partnership with Meals on Wheels, it's given us a sense like you complete us. Don't take that wrong. I'm not taking it from the movie. But I really do have that kind of sense for us as a food bank. Our partnership with Meals on Wheels is so solid. And even if we provide resources to try to help you, it's actually the going and the doing that is the key thing. And I just let your folks know that as a food bank, during that retreat day that we had, the strategic planning day, we saw this as one of the real highlights. You helped us to develop develop a capacity that we hadn't had to that degree before. Please let your folks know that we really think the world of them, and don't get too discouraged. I think you're handling that much better than I am, Chad, but I just think we as a community owe you so much.
I think since we're talking, and maybe one of the messages I'll share is we're open. I think our partnership with the food bank just came out of a simple communication back and forth. So we're open to